This panel will be moderated by Rich Miniter.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. We'll be getting our show on the road in just a moment. We're a little slower than the Barnum and Bailey Circus. On the other hand, there's no burning tents or elephants, so look at the bright side. Our first speaker today is Shakir Kabir. He's a, as you know, Jordanian intellectual, widely published author. In an article for the Kuwait Daily newspaper, he was asked why Islamic scholars haven't issued a fatwa against bin Laden. Very good question. And he has a lot to tell us. So if you're ready to speak, sir?
Good evening. Through my different readings, actually, in the Arab history, I noticed that classical secularism started by indirect way with the beginning of Umayyad regime, 661, 750. When Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan, the founder of Umayyad dynasty, left the imamate of prayer to certain sheikh or maybe to the grand judge at that time. This such of small incident did not draw the attention of many readers to that history, but it has a lot of meaning since the actor of this action was Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan, who fought as a political leader Ali bin Abi Talib, the fourth Rashid Caliph. In 657, Siffin battle between Muawiyah and Ali was not a mere struggle between two rivals or opponents. It was a struggle between the religious state and secular one. Caliph Muawiyah took many political, economic, social steps towards secularism within its primitive concept at that time. Converting of the state from religious state to patrimonial one was the main aspect of the secularist state at that time. Umayyad regime was submitted to the life requirements more than to religious one. Even some of Umayyad caliphs denied Muhammad's prophecy and said goodbye to Quran. Hashim, I quote now, Hashim tribe had played in Ryan, neither message has come nor revelation had been descended upon the Prophet. Yazid bin Muawiyah said this, who is the second Umayyad Caliph, and after that, Abdul Malik bin Marwan, who is the fifth also Umayyad Caliph, was reading in Quran when he received that he had become a Caliph. He closed Quran suddenly and he said this phrase that this is my last obligation to you. He is saying this to Quran. This is my last obligation to you. This phrase is the most political phrase carrying a lot of secular meaning and material signals. Caliph Abdul Malik had cut relation between mosque and state as Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan did before, and as his son also, Yazid bin Muawiyah, who is the second Caliph, did before. I will quote now that I will behead a person who is telling me to fear God. Caliph Abdul Malik said once during Friday sermon. This such of sentence is explaining to us that splitting between the mosque and state is done during Umayyad regime and during Abbasid regime 1255 as well. First and foremost, we can notice how our ancestors understand the difference between the constant of religion and changes of politics. Despite Umayyad state was a Muslim one, but it was not applying real Islam. On the other hand, we can find another aspect of secular state in the Arab classical state during Umayyad and Abbasid era. In both eras, regime had been built on tribalism base and classical political loyalty. If we go back to Uthman bin Affan, who is the third Rashidi Caliph, we will find Uthman who had sound the financial and political seeds of secularism when he granted a lot of money, land, and real estate to Umayyad family without calling him to account. On top of that, during Umayyad and Abbasid era, rational science had been started to spread around. The most important one was theology and physics at that time. Arab history started to enter at that time age of reason. If we know that the reference of theology was a rational Greek one. Any researcher reading history of Umayyad and Abbasid era will find splitting between ulama, the scholars, princes, soldiers, and citizens. At that time, it was forbidden to let soldiers indulging in politics or joining to political parties. This had started, I quote now, this had started during Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan and framed the historical experience of Muslim nations. This is what Muhammad Abid al-Jabiri said in his very important book, East and West Dialogue. Ottoman, now we are coming to the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman, I quote now, Ottoman secularism aspects had clearly started to frame when Ottoman rebuilt the state on educational, legal, and cultural basis, and breaking up the standards of pre-civilization that were belonging to geographical, linguistic, and financial affiliation. Also, Aziz Al-Adma, the Syrian professor of Islamic civilization at American University in Beirut, said this in his book, Religion, Presence in the Arab World. This was known as a re-engineering of the Ottoman state. The target of this action was to build up the society by individuals and not by groups. During era of Sultan Muhammad II, 1808-1839, many steps of military, educational, and managerial reforms has been taken. For example, Sultan Abdul Majid the first 1861, was a pioneer of Al-Humayun bath. Al-Humayun bath is the imperial bath, which was containing a bunch of managerial reforms. Most important things in this bath is to delete religious and racial discrimination in all domains and government utilities. Some researchers consider these reforms similar to slipping off a big nail of strong tie between state and mosque, but Ottoman religious establishment succeeded to stop most of these reforms, pretending that Islamic law, Sharia, has better than these regulations. And after that, Sultan Abdulaziz the first, in 1876, had continued reforms in many fields. During the Napoleon regime, he was the first Ottoman Sultan who had visited France. Sultan Abdulaziz had permitted for the first time to foreigners to own real estate in Ottoman Empire. He has issued many reform decrees concerning civil and religious things. He was the pioneer of Ottoman civil law. He had decreased the authority of religious people and establishments at that time that were under the religious establishment. Also, he had constricted the religious authorities of trade and education sector, which were the most important sectors in the empire at that time. One of his remarkable accomplishments was Istanbul University, but Sultan Abdulaziz has been toppled by religious establishment, and he had committed suicide after that. In the 19th century, separating between mosque and state, which is the most important thing here, was very clear in Muhammad Ali Pasha era in Egypt. Mr. Muhammad Ali Pasha had eliminated and destroyed the economic, social, and political foundations of the religious establishment. He deprived of their benefits, confiscated their wealth, and destroyed their trade and artisanship factions. Muhammad Ali Pasha put an end to the stage of religious establishment domination. In addition, Egyptian Pasha had changed the divine laws and replaced it by everyday one. And he completely converted the religious education to secular one. No doubt that this step was the first trial in the modern Arab history, and we did not watch another one after that, except what President Bourguiba did in 1956, 1957 in Tunisia concerning Al-Zaytuna Religious University. This was the only revolution in the educational religious system in the second half of the 20th century. At the end of 19th century, we watched the signals of secularism during Ismail Pasha 1863-1879 era. Ismail Pasha said, "I would like to make Egypt a piece of Europe." Ismail said this, and these days no Arab ruler dares to say this. Ismail Pasha built a modern state in Egypt, in different aspects and fields. And on the contrary, the 20th century, especially the second half of it, was the era of secularism retreating. And the main reason behind this was the reconnection between religion and politics, and the occurrence of religious resistance against imperialism during the fighting era for the sake of independence. Going back to Islam as a culture and identity was one of the most important motives towards fighting of colonization. Relationship between mosque and state during this era was positive sometimes and negative on the other hand. It depends on the rulers and sheikhs' needs to religion and politics to serve their affairs and to achieve their benefits. When Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahab was in need to have political power, he asked Saud House to help him. Same thing Saud House did when they in need to have a religious umbrella. In 1924, same thing happened with Al-Hussein bin Ali, Sheriff of Mecca, when he called himself Caliph of Muslims, besides his original title as a King of Arabs, to convince at that time Great Britain that he deserves to be the sole Arab leader to have both powers, the crown and religion, or the double D, Deen wa Dunya. I would like to assure here that classical Arab rulers have kept always sheikh of religion from state, or they brought them nearer to state according to their benefits, and to use those sheikhs as a tool and arms in the hand against their enemies, and to achieve their political financial targets. Rulers' intention was not to create a secular state and society, because no secularism without democracy, and no democracy without secularism also. There is a sort of correlation between secularism and democracy. Secularism means the freedom of belief, behavior, and opinion, which are the marks of democracy. These marks were not available in the eras of Arab classical state. Most of the Arab classical state and contemporary one were despotic and totalitarian state, where is no freedom or democracy, there is no secularism accordingly as we understand it today. Secularism is a bird. Secularism is a falcon. No way to fly without having two wings, freedom and democracy. But I have to draw the attention that this relationship between secularism and democracy is a new concept. In the early beginnings of secularism, there was no relationship between secularism and democracy. We had many examples for this in the West and in the East. In the West, we have France during Napoleon era, 1769, 1821, Nazi regime, Soviet Union, fascist regime, in Italy, Franquism in Spain, most of the Latin American countries, and China. In the East, we have Iran under Shah regime. We have Iraq and Syria under Ba'ath Party regime, Egypt under Nasser regime, and Libya now under Al-Qaddafi regime. Okay, the conclusion, of my research in secularism history and progress shows me the following. No democracy without secularism. There is secularism without democracy, yes. Democracy always leads to secularism. Secularism doesn't always lead to democracy. Secularism at the beginning stage was a was a bad, secularism belonged to dictatorship. Secularism today is a democratic one. Secularism started with dictatorship and ended with democracy. And secularism mechanism of dictatorship stops at a certain limit. It doesn't proceed without achieving a democratic improvement. Thank you.
With Shakir al-Nablusi. I think it was a very interesting talk, recovering a lost history of secularism. We tend to have a very monolithic view of the history of Islam, but it's important to remember that the ideological enemies of peace and freedom would like us to forget things. So it's an obligation of us to remember them. Our next speaker is Shire Kabir, who flew in from Dhaka, that's the capital of Bangladesh, as you know, just to speak to you. And let me tell you a little bit about him before he gets up to speak. He's a journalist. He's a filmmaker. He's the author of more than 70 books, works of history of the war in Bangladesh, the War of Independence, formerly, I guess, East Pakistan, books on human rights, on big ideas. He was also a prisoner of conscience. He was imprisoned, I think, twice, right? Is that right? Yes. So, like so many of the people who can bring testimony to you of what happens in extreme regimes, they've often spent some time in prison. So I bring you Shire Kabir, who's going to speak to you for the next 10 minutes.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the paper I'm going to present, the title is Cultural History of Secular Humanism in Bangladesh. Okay. Bangladesh was the first country in South Asia to have adopted a secular constitution. The War of Liberation that continued for 9 odd months in 1971 and culminated in the birth of Bangladesh was based on the secular Bengali spirit. Secularism, democracy, Bengali nationalism, and socialism were adopted as the fundamental principles of the state way back in 1972. It is worth mentioning here that it was not until 1976 that the Constitution of India, the largest secular democracy in the world, incorporated the principle of secularism. The concept of secularism in Bangladesh differs considerably from that in the West. In Bangladesh, as well as in India, secularism connotes separation of a state and not individuals from religion. While explaining in 1972 the rationale for adopting secularism as one of the fundamental principles of a state, the founding father of Bangladesh, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, said, secularism doesn't mean faithlessness, much less atheism. It is meant to ensure the right of each and every citizen of the country to practice his or her religion. We don't want to ban the practice of religion by enacting laws, nor shall we ever. The Muslim will continue to practice their religion, and the Hindus will continue to practice their religion. No one can stop them, and so will the Buddhists and Christians. The only thing that we won't allow is to use of religion as a political weapon. There is a separation of religion from a state and politics. And for a guarantee clause in 1972's Constitution, it was also mentioned that no one will be allowed to form a political party on the basis of religion. That is what we think something very unique for the Constitution of Bangladesh, which you will not find in any other country. Even in India, as I said before, the largest secular democracy in the world. Even in India, someone can make a political party on the basis of religion, whether it could be Hindu or Muslim. But unfortunately, after the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, this secular constitution was totally, secularism was removed from the constitution. The pro-Islamists, they grabbed power, and since then, since 1975, we have seen the, something unparalleled and, rise of Islamic fundamentalism in Bangladesh. Right now in Bangladesh, we have more than 100 Islamic militant organizations. But if we look back into the history, 4,000 years of the history of Bangladesh stands testimony to the fact that the spirit of secularism was not imported from the West. Blasphemous materialistic thoughts originated as early as the Vedic faith was introduced in the Indian subcontinent. Little wonder, more than 600 years before the birth of the Jesus Christ, the philosophy of Charvaka denied the existence of God, hell, heaven, immortality of soul, and life, thus gave rise to the materialistic belief in India. Having renounced such Vedic concept as deity, formal life, and reincarnation. In the old Vedic scripture, Rig Veda, earliest guru of the philosophy and a god of wisdom and eloquence, Brihaspati said, matter is the absolute being. Followers of Charvaka emphasized worldly gratification, which often influenced the believers as well. Later, as a challenge to the Vedic creed of the Hindus, came Jainism and Buddhism, both of which were looked down on by the Vedic adherents as atheism. The Bengalis have always tended to be secular thanks to the influence of Charvaka and Buddhism. However, secularism has coexisted in the spirit of the Bengalis with a course of religious rituals, particularly those that have something to do with the worldly gains. About the Bengali cultural legacy and racial traits, Professor Ahmad Sharif said, the name of our country is Bangladesh, so our language is Bangla, and we are Bengali as a race. We are children of this land. Since prehistoric time, our physics and our psyches have been sustained by the fostering the soil of this country, by the nourishment of this nature, and by the customs and traditions of this people. As a race, we are not Aryans, nor are we Arabs, Iranians, or Turks. We are very much descendants of the Austric ethnic group of the country. Our ethnicity is different, our intellects, our self-directed, our traditions, and distinctive our cultural uniqueness. Previously, we were enemies, later pagans, and afterwards Hindus and Buddhists. Now we are Hindus or Muslims. We have adopted alien creeds and foreign languages only to mold them as our convenience. That is very important case in Bangladesh, that is to be noted. This is testified by the fact that an atheist like Buddha not only developed a pristine orientation towards life, but also resolved to endeavor towards the attainment of immortality. Idols are numerous deities, embellished Buddhist monasteries. Abandoning Hinojan and Mohajan, they adopted Vajrajan and Shahojan, which is nothing but Guruism. His orientation is towards life, so he doesn't trifle with matters or belittle worldly enjoyment. He is therefore prepared to do whatever his life and livelihood takes to him. He has created gods for his sake of the security of his life and livelihood. He desires for a gratified afterlife doesn't stem from his heart. It is rather phony. His adaptation of Buddhism or Brahminism mirrored in the mouth and not in the heart. The Bengalis accepted Hinduism and Buddhism only after fine-tuning them to their materialistic idea. In the same fashion, they later adopted Islam and Christianity. Islam came to this land about 1,000 years ago and was preached by the Sufis. With a few exceptions, Sufis preached Islam by virtue of humanism, not by the sword. And victimized by the discriminatory caste system, Hindu people belonging to scheduled caste converted to Islam to escape discriminations or, in later period, to receive favors from the Muslim rulers. However, this brand of Islam differed substantially from the pure mutakallimin Islam practiced in Arabia. People from this region were especially attracted by the brand of Islam that was founded on the virtues of liberal humanism. Dances, music, arts, all are forbidden in Islam. However, the Sufis ignored the prescription and practiced them in the worldly. It is worthy to mention that Muslim singers were unparalleled in Hindustani classical music in the northern and northwestern India. As a result, it influenced the followers of the Chishtiya and Sarwardiya tariqa of the Sufism. There are 18, tariqas of Sufism, and Bangladesh, in Bengal, we have 4 brands of Sufism. And those who belong to Chishtiya and Sarwardiya, they practice, all kind of cultural, expressions. The Muslim also made valuable contributions toward the development of North Indian classical dance. Hindu landlords of Bengal used to sign up Muslim singers and dance girls from Lucknow, Jaipur, Agra, Allahabad during Durga Puja and other family festivals. The virtues of humanism and equity that characterized Sufism had a tremendous impact on the ancient form of Hinduism in Bengal. The appearance of Vaishnava faith founded by Chaitanya Dev in 15th century is a case in a point. Human compassion has been reflected in various forms of the writings of Vaishnava poets. As the famous Vaishnava poet Chandidas of 15th century put it like this: "Listen, O brother man, man is above everything, there is no greatest truth than him." Even before that, during Charjapad, a collection of lyrical poems composed by the Buddhist monks and supposed to be the earliest specimen of Bengali literature, Buddhist poets revealed that of humanism and forwarded upon the religious rituals that had nothing to do with life. About 1100 years back, a couplet song composed by Charjapad poet Sarahpar, he wrote, "What will you gain by your candle lightning? What by your holy offering? And what will you get by going to pilgrimage or by living in solitude in the woods? Can one achieve salvation merely by bathing in the holy waters?" So these are the words written, 1100 years back in Bangladesh. The philosophy is amplified, reflected in the folk songs of Fakir Lalon Shah and the Baul, tradition of Bengal. 150 years back, Lalon Shah wrote, "Oh, when shall such a human society be created where no racial distinction will exist between Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, and Christians?" In many a song, Lalon's secular humanist ideology has been exemplified. Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore was highly influenced by Lalon Shah. In the rich multicultural legacy of Bengalis, recognition of diverse views in the ways of life have been reflected in the Bengali literature, music, dance, art, festivals of various types. The main ingredient of these rural Bengali cultures was secular and non-communal in nature. By the European standards, it may be regarded as soft secularism or pseudo-secularism. However, secularism may be practiced without denying the human aspects of religions. Bangladesh is a case in point. As a matter of fact, modern scientific education motivates people to become secular, for religions have no impact on science and practical life. However, the goal of the secular humanist in Muslim-majority country like Bangladesh should be primarily to stop the political use of religions and confine them to individual lives, so long as vast multitude of people live in faith. The communist rulers of the Soviet Union in East Europe met their dooms after waging a war against the practice of religions. Emancipation of man from his haughty attitude towards his race, religion, and caste calls for enlightenment. Evidently, there are political, economical, and social reasons behind the rise of fundamentalism in South Asian countries, including Bangladesh. It has always thrived on government patronization. The militant fundamentalists of Bangladesh are receiving enormous amount of financial supports, mainly from Saudi Arabia, Middle East, and Pakistan, besides the government. The common people of this largely agrarian land have always been averse to fundamentalism, and their cultural heritage has always been bereft of the ingredient thereof. Thousands of years of our history of secular humanistic practices testify to the fact that fundamentalists and the communist forces of Bangladesh would not be able to keep going if it had not been supported or get cooperation from the government or from the outside world. Thank you very much.
It's probably the most Bengali literature we had the benefit of hearing in quite some time. I think the question we should ask him, though, is if there is such a wonderful tradition of secularism in Bangladesh, why, when bin Laden first declared war on America in 1998, one of his front groups was from Bangladesh. Maybe somebody will raise that in the question period.